Welcome in, everybody, to certainly what is an interesting episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody is having a great day. And when I tell you, wow, did not think, listen, when I schedule my vacations, basically all of them are in June, assuming what could possibly happen outside of an angry Caitlin Clark discourse. Well, we got those, but we also got the news on Thursday morning that Dan Hurley, UConn Huskies head coach, and the Los Angeles Lakers, they're at least flirting. They're at least looking at each other from across the bar. Will Rob Pelinka go over and make the move? Will Dan Hurley accept that drink? Will they go home together? We're going to discuss that over the next few minutes. By the way, just to kind of keep everybody in the scheduling loop here. So I actually returned from vacation today. So crazy story. Woke up in Cabo, came straight home, am doing this. I actually have to travel again this weekend. So this is kind of a quick reaction show. I do want to get to some other stuff here in the coming days. Trevin Brazil going to Arkansas. Jackson Robinson didn't even get a chance to react to that. So we will have probably Monday night, maybe Tuesday, depending on the travel schedule, the full kind of normal Aaron Torres pod. And then we are back in a routine. But today it is all Dan Hurley, all Los Angeles Lakers. And boy, oh boy, do I have a lot of thoughts on the topic. Everybody come on in. Appreciate everybody's support. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, please make sure to do so. If something happens over the weekend, I will be going live. I'll actually be in Vegas, so I don't know if it'll be at a pool. I don't know if it'll be at a hotel bar, whatever, but we will go live. So make sure you're subscribed. Also, if you're not subscribed to the podcast feed, Apple or Spotify, make sure to subscribe to the Aaron Torres pod as well. With that said, it's 5:06 Eastern or Pacific time, 8:06 Eastern. This news broke about 12 hours ago. NBA Finals are coming up here in just a little bit. So let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, like I said, when I booked my vacation, did not think on the final day that I would be waking up in Cabo to about, I would guess, probably 20 DMs between Instagram and Twitter. A lot of tag notifications. Hey, Torres, wake up. So I just got home. I want to share a bunch of news, but obviously everybody knows the details now, or at least the loose details, as Dan Hurley has emerged as the favorite, or at least somebody that the Los Angeles Lakers are very interested in. By the way, I'll be reading a lot of direct tweets, a lot of direct quotes, so that I'm making sure not to misquote anybody, miss whatever. But let's get into the news. It dropped, I believe, about 6:50 Eastern time. So shout out to all the early birds that saw this in real time. But this was the report. Breaking from Adrian Wojnarowski, ESPN. The Los Angeles Lakers are targeting Connecticut's Dan Hurley to become the franchise's next head coach and are preparing a massive long-term offer to bring the back-to-back national champion to the NBA, sources tell ESPN. So that was the story. And I'll be honest, the second that I saw it, I'll be blunt, I really wasn't that surprised, because to me, what it comes down to is that I remember about, a month ago, Dan Hurley went on JJ Redick's podcast. And at the time, even then, LeBron James tweeted out, do you remember he made a tweet after the JJ Redick podcast appearance? And here's the LeBron quote from after Dan Hurley's appearance. He said, this is a direct quote from LeBron himself on Dan Hurley. He's so damn good, along with his staff, super creative with their love it. Point being is that obviously at that moment, Dan Hurley had LeBron's seal of approval. And beyond that, we know that LeBron never, ever does anything on social media by accident. Everything he puts out there, every player he praises, there's always a reason, there's always motive behind it. By the way, there is no producer Matt today. Producer Matt is still on vacation, deservedly so. So you're not going to see the tweets pop up and all that stuff. But because I saw that LeBron James tweet months ago, this wasn't surprising. As a matter of fact, when the Lakers job opened, I almost referenced that tweet, but decided not to. Obviously, I have a lot of UConn fans that follow me. Didn't even want to put it into the ether. Didn't want to get yelled at, all that good stuff. So I wasn't surprised. But now, and it's interesting because, I see a lot of comments in the chat. We'll get to some of them at the end. But I wasn't surprised. But what I will say is I'm glad that I really had about 8, 10, 12 hours to really chew on this, because I've got a lot of different thoughts. I've read a lot of different reports, seen a lot of different things. The latest is that Dan Hurley is going to Los Angeles this weekend to meet with the team. And let me just say this. Listen, my personal opinion, I will not beat around the bush. I don't think that this is a 0% proposition. I don't think that there is 0% chance that this is happening. But I also don't think it's a 100% done deal yet as well, even if Dan Hurley is reportedly, according to most recently Adrian Wojnarowski, headed out to Los Angeles. So let's break it all down. Let's talk about it. And let's just have just a blunt, transparent conversation about Dan Hurley. And before I do, I should probably reference one last thing before we actually get into the nuts and bolts of this, the meat and potatoes. This is I'm going to do the Eminem in 8 Mile thing, where I tell everybody so that like when in Eminem in 8 Mile, when he basically when he knows what his opponents are going to say about him, and he goes on the stage, he goes, "I am white. I am an effing bum. I do live in a trailer with my mom." Well, this is the part where I have to say, yes, I'm a UConn alum. Yes, I'm a UConn graduate. I guess alum and graduate are the same things. Yes, I'm from Connecticut. So if you want to say, oh, this is Torres being a homer, Torres defending his school, that's perfectly fine. I feel like I'd be saying the same thing if I had all these facts about Bill Self, about Scott Drew, about Mark Pope, about John Calipari, about whoever could potentially be a head coach. I don't think it changed my opinion. And again, my opinion is that as of right now, about 8 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, I don't think it's 0%, but I don't think it's 100% either. Because ultimately, when you look at this, what you really have to look at is what Dan Hurley has to weigh in deciding if he wants to be the next Lakers head coach. And what I think about when I see this is a couple different things. Is what are all of the variables? What is everything that Dan Hurley has to think about when considering if he wants this job? Because I think there's a few different ways to look at it. First of all, it's just the nuts and bolts facts of the deal. And the facts of the deal are, listen, and this is part of why I don't think it's 0%, but I don't think it's 100% either, is that Dan Hurley has been open, at least with his confidants, that one day he does want to coach in the NBA. And so to me, that's why I can't sit here and say it's 0%, as well as some other information that has obviously come out in the most recent hours. But at the same time, what he has to weigh is a couple things. One, does he want to coach pros? That's something he obviously, now listen, I hear a lot of, well, Dan Hurley's demeanor, how would that go with pros? Listen, I think Dan Hurley is smart enough to know that he has to adjust some things that he does, has to adjust a little bit of who he is if he wants to coach pros. So I don't really worry about that so much. What I do worry about is, does he want to coach pros that are currently on the roster with the Los Angeles Lakers? Because all I heard all day was, well, I mean, it's the Lakers. You don't turn down the Lakers. It's LeBron James. You don't turn down LeBron James. To which I say, like, is this 2014? Like I looked at when I went to bed last night in Cabo and I woke up, did I wake up in 2014? Is LeBron still the definitive best player in the world that simply having him on your roster puts you in position to win a championship? The answer is no. Let me take this a step further. Did I wake up and is it 1984? Is Jerry Buss still running the Lakers? Is this the best run organization in sports? Or bluntly, is it one of the worst run organizations in sports? Because when I look at the exact Los Angeles Lakers situation, the situation that Dan Hurley will be walking in, and I think these are all things that he has to consider, is like when he looks at the situation, what is he really getting himself into? Because I see some people on social media like, he gets the chance to coach LeBron. Again, what is this, 2014? I don't see 29-year-old LeBron that's going to get you the finals every year simply by being on your roster. What I see is a 40-year-old coach killer who bluntly, everything he touches turns to you know what at this point in his career. Listen, I said this when the Los Angeles Lakers lost in the first round to the Denver Nuggets of the playoffs. We don't talk a ton of NBA on this podcast, but I host Fox Sports Radio. We talked all about it. And I said at the time is like LeBron, it's almost an impossible situation because I don't believe in this year, in 2024, I don't believe that you can win an NBA title if LeBron is the best player on your team. I just don't believe that you can do that. The problem is that LeBron has too big of an ego where he is never in any moment going to allow anyone to be the best player on the team besides him. And so this isn't a situation where you're coaching the Lakers and like Anthony Davis is like a 26-year-old rising star and LeBron's ready to pass the torch. You know, Anthony Davis is over 32 as in over 30 as well. You know that Anthony Davis is brittle, that this is basically the first time in his pro career that he played like over 70 games in forever. And so that's what you're inheriting. That's what you're getting. Austin Reeves is your third best guy. And listen, I actually think Rob Pelinka has done a pretty good job kind of tooling and retooling this roster again. But don't mistake a good job for an elite one. And so I just don't get this idea that the Los Angeles Lakers is some sort of elite job in 2024. So let's go ahead and continue to talk about this. Got to send out a tweet really quick on the Torres page here. So let's keep it going. Okay, so you have to factor in that this is not 2014, 2015, 2013, 2011 LeBron James. That is part of it, okay? That is absolutely part of it. But here's the other part of it that immediately, when I read the Woj report, okay, and we're going to get to Woj in a minute, because I know nobody's ever allowed to say anything mean about Woj. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest to ever do it, blah, 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 whatever. But if you read the Woj report closely, it kind of sort of sounds like a press release. Okay, so first of all, this was something else that immediately jumped out to me in the Woj report, is that on top of the fact you got to coach a 40-year-old LeBron, let's also not forget, because I kind of forgot about this at the moment, the Bronny thing is still a thing, okay? And so, again, I go read straight from the Woj report, okay? This was a direct quote from Woj's report. Assuming James, this is LeBron, returns to LA in free agency, the possibility of using the 55th pick in this month's NBA draft on USC freshman guard Bronny James makes Hurley an even more intriguing candidate. Are you kidding me? You think of the top 100 reasons that Dan Hurley would take the Los Angeles Lakers job has anything to do with Bronny James? But then the counter to that is, I think that's a big reason why LeBron James would sign off on this. Oh, he's a great talent developer. I love his offense. He can help me, but he can help Bronny too. So Dan Hurley's I'm not sitting here saying UConn's the best job in America. That's not what I'm saying. But he's gonna leave UConn to basically be a glorified AAU coach in an organization, by the way, where let's not forget, they go through coaches pretty regularly, don't they? I mean, just think about the last two coaches that the Los Angeles Lakers had prior to this opening. Darvin Ham, last year, made the Western Conference Finals. So his first year makes the Western Conference Finals. And then, of course, this year they run into the defending champions and they play them really tough and they lose in the opening round. And so, we sit there and it's just like, that is the last coach they had. And oh, by the way, on top of him being the last coach that they had, what was the coach before? Frank Vogel, who, oh, by the way, won an NBA championship with LeBron and ran him out of town. The coach before that last won a title with LeBron, Ty Lue, he abandoned. The coaches before that, David Blatt won a title or got him to the finals. He got him fired. I mean, you're talking about 4-5 straight coaches, if you include Luke Walton, that were either fired or abandoned by LeBron after making at least the Western Conference Finals. Two of them won him a title, helped him win a title, and one of them got him, of course, to the finals in David Blatt. So those are LeBron's last 5 coaches. That's what we're talking about. Now there's the Bronny factor. But let me even take it a step further. And again, I understand he's on a plane to LA. I'm not saying that it's 0%. But the facts of the story, if you actually read them, don't even really make much sense, okay? So the facts of the story, this is, again, directly from Woj's report. And even before Woj's report, we should reference 2 things. One, Shams, really good reporter, just 2 days ago said JJ Redick, the Lakers have zeroed in on JJ Redick, okay? That was what Shams reported 2 days ago. Then JJ Redick, my buddy himself, was asked about the Lakers job or NBA coaching opportunities. And what did he say? He said, I'll evaluate all of my options after the season, or we'll have the conversation after the season. If JJ Redick wasn't a candidate for head coaching jobs, he would just say, I have no other options. I'm working at ESPN unless something surprising pops up. So unless you believe that the Lakers totally did a pivot in 48 hours, then this part of Woj's story makes sense. And this is the part that I keep tripping up on. This is from Woj's first article in his article. First paragraph in his article. He said, the Lakers have had preliminary contact with Hurley and the sides are planning to escalate discussions in the coming days, sources told ESPN. Hurley has been at the forefront of the Lakers search process from the beginning, even while the organization has done due diligence interviewing several other candidates. So, let me get this straight. You fired Darvin Ham May 3rd. Dan Hurley has been available to be in touch with since the national championship game in April. But you just decide to wait a month to escalate things when he is available to talk? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to wait a full month to target this guy. And so when I look at this situation, I'm not saying it's 0% because bluntly, he's on a plane to Los Angeles at some point in the next 12 hours, whatever it is. You saw the John Fanta report from earlier in the day that the team has been made aware this is real, whatever. But to me, this doesn't pass the smell test. If he was the leading candidate all along, why was JJ Redick refusing to talk about it? And why did they wait a month? And this is the part where I pull out my Brian Windhorst face. My Brian Windhorst face. Remember that Brian Windhorst tweet where he kind of did the and he's trying to put things together? Let's put some pieces together. Why would Dan Hurley all of a sudden become the leading candidate? And oh, by the way, why would Dan Hurley listen if he was the leading candidate? And so here's what I actually think is going on. What I believe, and this is honest, is first of all, if Dan Hurley was really the leading candidate from the beginning, they would have talked to him 6 weeks ago. But what I ultimately think happened is that they knew all along, we want JJ Redick. Now, is it 100% because he's LeBron's buddy? Let's call him what he is. He's LeBron's podcast and drinking buddy. They sit on the couch and drink wine together. Sorry, it's the truth. He's LeBron's drinking buddy with no NBA qualifications other than that he's LeBron's buddy, and he hosts a really popular podcast. He's articulate on a podcast. Guess what? I'm an articulate podcaster too. Doesn't mean I'm getting a NBA head coaching job anytime soon. So you have that element of it. You have that just 2 days ago, Shams put out the report, and the Lakers have been quiet in their, they've interviewed all these. None of these guys are getting the job. Stop. Kenny Atkinson's not getting the job. James Barajo or whatever his name is not getting the job. And so to me, why does it make sense? It makes sense for a pretty simple reason. It's because on the one hand, if the Lakers fly out Dan Hurley, and if they wine and dine him, well, by the way, happening during the NBA Finals, kind of interesting timing. So JJ Redick could be available in a week. Just saying. Well, now all of a sudden, one, if Dan Hurley turns you down, but two, even if he doesn't, you can sit there and say, and by the way, they haven't offered him anything. You can sit there and say, well, we tried. I mean, we went after this star college coach, 2-time back-to-back national champion, whatever. And yeah, we tried. But listen, the guy that we wanted wasn't available, so we went after the next best thing. That's what they can sell publicly. And because no NBA media member actually asked tough questions, everybody's afraid to piss off everybody, starting with LeBron James and Clutch. I don't work for him, so I don't really care. I don't get a check from him. Doesn't matter to me. They can say that. But then, too, what does Dan Hurley get out of it? Dan Hurley, by the way, is in the middle of contract negotiations. Dan Hurley is looking for more money, more guarantees, more stuff for his players and his assistant coaches, more salary for them, more resources for the players. Well, now he's kind of got UConn by the you-know-what. He's got him by the you-know-what. I was just in Mexico, so I will not say the American word, but he's got him by the cojones, okay? I like Dave Benedict. He's UConn's AD. But he's got work to do because there's no more options. So, yes, I think there's a scenario where Dan Hurley is 100% the favorite, 100%. By the way, I don't Shams would just completely whiff on this story. I think there is a scenario where Dan Hurley is the 100% favorite. He flies out, they agree to a deal, whatever. I also think there's a much more plausible scenario where it's kind of a you scratch my back, I scratch yours. He just so happens to emerge as the favorite 2 days after a report that JJ Redick is actually the favorite. You come out here, you interview with us. We can say we tried. You can go back to UConn. You don't have to take this mediocre job with a 40-year-old has-been, because I'm sorry. Rather coach Luka, rather coach Jokic, rather coach a bunch of guys in this era, rather coach Anthony Edwards. And we can all say we did our thing, and then you get the raise, the extension, the whatever that you want. And oh, by the way, there's one other thing here. And I'm just going to say it. You know how I just said, that I said I'd have some stuff on Woj here. Well, let me say this. You know, I just said, by the way, I don't work for Clutch. They don't write me a check. Well, guess what? I don't work for Woj either. And I'm just going to say something about Woj that you're not supposed to say. There are plenty of examples where he very clearly leaks sort of false information to help sources so that he gets the real story later. This is the part. I want you to write it down. So we are at 22:48 of this show, okay? And some of the comments are cracking me up. Woj, okay. So Woj, really quick. So listen, great reporter, whatever. There's also been plenty of examples where he kind of smudges the facts to help out a source. And then he just so happens to break the real story when it happens, right? Take you back 2 summers ago. 2023 NBA draft. Just going to say it, whatever. If you remember, that was the year Paolo Banchero, Chet Holmgren, and who was the other guy? Jabari Smith were the top 3 in the NBA draft, okay? And all workout session season long. Jabari Smith, he's going number 1. He's the Orlando Magic pick, whatever. Then if you remember, about 12 hours before the NBA draft, all this gambling money started flowing in on Paolo Banchero. And it just so happened that when all that gambling money started flowing in, everyone's saying Paolo's going number 1. Who was the guy that put out the tweet that said, no. As of right now, Orlando's plan is to still take Jabari Smith number 1. Then guess what happened? Couple hours later, Paolo goes number 1, and guess who breaks the story? It's Woj. And why would he do that? Oh, he helps his sources in Orlando. He puts out what is an inaccurate report, so they still have leverage to try and trade the pick if they want to, or get the guy that they want. And then he scratches their back, you scratch mine, whatever. And of course, when it's time to actually share the real news, he does the same. The other one, by the way, which I brought up on Twitter today, Donovan Mitchell. Okay, I was on air on Fox Sports Radio the day that Rudy Gobert was traded by the Utah Jazz. Rudy Gobert traded by the Utah Jazz. They just hired Danny Ainge. It's clear they're going to tear the whole thing down and build it back up. Just hired Danny Ainge. Well, minutes after the Rudy Gobert report, there's a report from Woj. The Jazz are planning on rebuilding around Donovan Mitchell, not trading him. I said on Fox Sports Radio that day, you can ask Monty Bolaños, one of the update hosts, because I bet her a pizza dinner, a pizza lunch, whatever. She had to buy pizza for the whole office. I said, Donovan Mitchell's going to get traded by the start of the season. Woj is just putting that out there to help the Jazz keep leverage to try and trade him. What ends up happening, a few months later, he gets traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So I could go on and on. Bottom line, I believe in my heart of hearts that based on what I know at this moment, I don't think Dan Hurley is the next Lakers head coach. You can disagree. I just looked at the comments. Somebody was like, wow, Torres is going crazy ex-girlfriend mode. I'm just telling you how I really feel. I think there's something there. And I think there's the basketball stuff too. Like, I don't just think it's one big conspiracy theory, but I think both sides help each other to get what they want. Dan Hurley, a new contract at UConn. The Lakers, they take some heat for hiring JJ Redick. They'll take less heat, but I think there's the basketball stuff too. Like, you're going to come to LA and coach a 40-year-old LeBron who maybe has one good year left, but probably not. And then you're stuck with aging Anthony Davis, with Bronny, like, just doesn't pass the smell test to me. I think Dan Hurley, by the way, will end up in the NBA one day. I think all the people calling me a crazy ex-girlfriend in the chat right now will probably, there will be a time where, I'm in sad mode, Torres in tears because he took the New York Knicks job, or the Boston Celtics job, or maybe the Los Angeles Lakers job down the road. This just doesn't feel like the one to me. And I don't believe it going forward. What I do think is worth mentioning, and I'll be quick on this because NBA Finals is about to start, but what I do think is worth mentioning, there are two real ramifications that need to be discussed in terms of if he were to take the job. What would UConn actually do? And then from there, also, I think the bigger question, of course, would be what happens to that roster, which is a top 5 roster going into 2024, 2025. We'll take a quick break. We'll talk about that. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more. All available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. More Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. I do want to go ahead and switch gears, talk a little bit about some of the, ripple effects, if you will, of the Dan Hurley situation at UConn. And I'll get to some of your comments at the end. I'm trying to save them. I'm trying not to stare too much because I think everybody's kind of like going off the deep end here. Torres in tears, crazy ex-wife. You think Bron has 2 more good years in him, shaking my head. So some of you agree with me. So I do want to talk about what I think there's 2 interesting, side things about this whole situation. One, where does UConn go from here with a head coach if Dan Hurley were to leave? But I think as important, the part that, yes, people talked about, but if Dan Hurley leaves, in mid-June at that point, it'll probably be June 7th or 8th if he actually accepts the job. You have a situation where one of the best rosters in all of college basketball will be free to enter the transfer portal. As everybody knows, if a coach leaves, players have 30 days from the day that he departs. And to me, that is the very interesting part. What would happen to that roster? Now, it's worth noting, there's another side to this. And I promise I'll get to the roster and all that in a minute. But this is the other part that trips me up about the idea of Dan Hurley bailing on UConn on June 6th or 7th or 8th. It comes a week after the NBA draft deadline. It comes a week after Alex Karaban decided to withdraw from the NBA draft and return to UConn to compete for a third national championship when he would have been drafted in a couple weeks. And so, Dan Hurley's all about loyalty. Again, this is part of the reason why the story doesn't totally add up to me, because Dan Hurley notably hates the portal. Dan Hurley notably is very loyal to his players, but he's been the leader for a month, but the Lakers didn't actually reach out. Now they reach out, and now he's looking at it. The whole thing just doesn't make sense to me. But I do think it's worth noting, like, what happens if he leaves? Who would get the job? And then, as importantly, what the heck would happen to all those players? Obviously, I think there will be some interesting external candidates, but I also think it's worth noting, it's really hard to get a good guy to leave a good job this time of year. And this is the part where I'm going to totally take off my UConn hat. I think it'd be darn near impossible to get a sitting head coach at a real school. Now, you want to go get a low major, of course. Somebody's going to want the opportunity to coach at UConn, make millions, all that. But to get a good head coach that's going to rally the fan base, like, I'm sorry, it's hard to get one of those guys. I go back to this time last year. If you remember, Bob Huggins had his unfortunate incident at West Virginia at this time last year. And I remember there was all these reports, they're going to do a national search. And right away, what did I say? I said, that's not going to happen. Because think about, somebody would have to, remember, you spend all April and May recruiting these guys, selling them on your school, telling them why they should come to your school and be part of what they're doing. Now June comes and you have a good job, and all these kids, you were just on Zooms with them, you just met their parents, now you're going to leave. So if UConn opens, I think it'll be really hard. Now, I still think there are candidates you should go after. The one name that I heard, which I thought was really interesting, was Bruce Pearl. Bruce Pearl is from the Boston area originally. He's from Massachusetts. As he famously said on this podcast once, he said he was the Boston College mascot back in the day. And so I look at Bruce Pearl, listen, Auburn's a really good job, but the SEC is a gauntlet right now, okay? And it's not a great job. And my understanding with his contract, he's one of the few that has a buyout that actually sort of is manageable to get out of. Like Nate Oates has like a $14 million buyout. UConn cannot afford to pay $14 million to get Nate Oates out of his buyout. Nate Oates has a national championship contending team. He ain't leaving, Mick Cronin, whatever, has a huge buyout. Like, these guys are not leaving. Bruce Pearl does have a very manageable buyout, and I do think there'd at least be some allure. Now, the problem with Bruce Pearl, from my understanding, is for a long time now, he's been trying to get his son, Stephen Pearl, basically named the coach in waiting at Auburn. Best way to do that is to have the leverage that Bruce Pearl would have if UConn was actively pursuing him. And that is a situation where, that could be the thing that finally gets Auburn to cave and say, okay, it's written in pen. It's written in your contract. Stephen Pearl will replace you. If UConn has a real offer in June, Auburn has a team good enough to win the SEC, then all of a sudden, maybe that's the move that Bruce Pearl makes. The other interesting name that I did think of, and everyone's going to say I'm crazy for saying it, but it's a name that I brought up during the situation with Kentucky, and I'll say it here, and you're going to make fun of me, but just hear me out. It's Billy Donovan, the Chicago Bulls head coach. And I know what everyone's going to say, Torres, nobody's leaving the NBA to be a college coach in 2024. NIL this, blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, that's just not true, okay? And it's interesting because Now, why did Billy, first of all, let's even backtrack because I've done the Billy Donovan spiel when it came to Kentucky, but let's do it here, okay? So when the Kentucky job opened, there was a moment in time where people in basketball really thought Billy Donovan is actually willing to listen to Kentucky if Kentucky is willing to wait. Now, we're going to have a lot of Kentucky fans listening to this, and we talked about it at the time, is that with Billy Donovan, if you remember, there was like a week where he, like, basically, like, the Kentucky job opens on a Sunday. They miss on Scott Drew and ironically Dan Hurley on like Wednesday, Thursday-ish. And the play-in was on like Tuesday. And so Kentucky moved fast on Mark Pope. I didn't hate it at the time, but there was a lot of talk of if you just wait until Tuesday, Billy Donovan will probably take your call. Now, the counter to that would be, well, Billy Donovan, assistant coach at Kentucky, had been linked to Kentucky for years, had a relationship with Mitch Barnhart. Okay. The counter is as follows. It's two things that I said when the Kentucky job opened. The first one is he's going to get fired by the Chicago Bulls next year, okay? Because Billy Donovan, he's going into year 5. Here is what Billy Donovan has done as an NBA head coach over the last couple years as a Chicago Bulls head coach, okay? Over the last couple years as a Chicago Bulls head coach, 31-41, missed the playoffs. 46-36, lost in the first round. 40-42, missed the playoffs. 39-43, technically made the play-in this year, but ended up missing the playoffs. So Billy Donovan is going into year 5 next year with 0 playoff wins in terms of a series, 1 playoff win overall, and he ain't going to have a roster that's in position to make the playoffs and have success next year. And so he knows his time is coming. He's too loyal to leave in the middle of the season, but it's the offseason. And so if I'm Dave Benedict, what I do is I go to Billy Donovan and I say point blank, here's the deal. Listen, you can sit here and wait to be fired and whatever, this and that. But what you can also do is rather than sit here and wait to be fired in a year, come back to college where you'll be a god, where you'll be revered. And here's the other thing that I keep going back to with Billy Donovan. Why did Billy Donovan get out of college basketball in the first place? It's because point blank, like, he didn't like to recruit and he didn't like dealing with handlers and parents and this and that and whatever. And it's still not going to be easy in 2024, but it's actually a little bit easier now than it was when he left. When he left, it was, you got to be recruiting, 20, Billy Donovan at Florida was probably recruiting 25 to 30 kids per class, especially the junior and sophomore classes, And so, you got to be texting kids at night and, oh my goodness, tell me about your high school game and you had your prom. And it's like, you don't really do that anymore. Most of your roster building is done in April and May, and most of it is done with your collective. You tell your collective who you want, you tell the money, and the collective either has it or it doesn't. It was interesting. I was listening to an interview with BYU head coach Kevin Young on my flight back home from Cabo. And in it, he said, people say, oh, college is so chaotic. He said, no, it's like, to me, I had never been in college, so I have nothing to compare it to, but it's like the NBA. You pursue certain guys, there's certain advantages, certain disadvantages, you sell style of play, but there's a monetary factor that comes into it. And so I just think Billy Donovan would be more receptive to that idea if, in fact, he were to decide to return to college basketball, especially, again, because he's going to get fired by the Bulls in a year from now. Now, obviously, beyond him, it gets murky, and that's when you start to get into the 2 lead assistant coaches at UConn, Kamani Young and Luke Murray. Luke Murray, of course, is kind of the offensive whiz kid, gets all the credit for revitalizing the offense. Kamani Young, great, both evaluator, developer, recruiter, what's the right word? Game planner as well. Dan Hurley went out of his way to compliment the scouting report, the scout, as they call it, at the Final Four that he put together to help beat Purdue in that national championship game. Maybe it was the Bama game, whatever. But like Dan Hurley's like, no, this guy's a future head coach. And so I do think that realistically probably keeps the team together, because that's the other part that's kind of worth discussing. What ends up happening if Dan Hurley leaves to that roster? Again, there's a 30-day transfer window, and all those guys can leave. Now, admittedly, some of them are going to leave. I think for some of them, there's not a lot of great options at this point. I mean, think about college basketball. Think about, all the rosters that we talk about on this show every week. Kentucky, Arkansas, Louisville, UCLA, Kansas, whoever. Most of them have a scholarship, maybe none. I kind of tried to follow the Coleman Hawkins, recruitment while I was away. And it was like Louisville doesn't have a scholarship, but maybe they could find one. Kentucky has one scholarship. And, I look at the UConn roster and I say, where is Alex Caravan going to be in a better role than he would be at UConn? Where is Hassan Diarra going to be in a better role than he'd be at UConn? Now, it's also worth noting some of those guys that just got to campus, it's almost like the Nick Saban thing, right? When Nick Saban retired in January, they mostly retained the key players on the roster outside of a Caleb Downs. But who were the big guys that left? The kids that had just gotten to campus, the kids that had no affiliation with the school. Julian Sand, he goes to Ohio State. And I'm just going to be blunt, like Liam McNeely, he's been in stores for 10 minutes, okay? If Dan Hurley leaves, I think Liam McNeely's probably going to reopen his recruitment and at least look at options. Kentucky, are they a factor there? Calipari at Arkansas liked them. Obviously, Bill Self liked them at Kansas. And I think we have to have a real conversation about Liam McNeely not being a UConn Husky. Aiden Mahaney, he just got to campus. Does he decide to does Aiden Mahaney decide, you know what? I just got here. I respect the program, but this program that I signed up for is not the program that I am currently going to be a part of. Does he reevaluate his situation? So those are the things to keep an eye on. And those are the things that we will keep an eye on. Do I dare look at the comments section before we get out of here? Because I do want to take a few comments and then get out of here. Let's take a look. Let's see. Let's take a look here. How many comments do I have? Most of them. AT, my friend, you have enjoyed these views from Arkansas and Kentucky and USC fans. Now your team shall provide the content, but look at the bright side. You get another month of content and Billy Donovan as your new head coach. So he agrees on the Billy Donovan. Steven says, been waiting on this since I saw the news. Appreciate your support. Steven. H-Fan says, Rothstein says they're meeting on Friday. We talked a little bit about that. Okay. Jacob Petruzzi asks about the next head coach. Listen, I mentioned Luke Murray. I mentioned Kamani Young. Listen, I would assume it would be Kamani. I have no intel on that. Kamani's the associate head coach. Kamani's a little bit older. Luke Murray, Luke Murray's 39, I think, 38. And I actually think Luke Murray would be a guy that Dan Hurley would try hard as to make sure that he brought to Los Angeles with him, because LeBron loves the the system that Dan Hurley runs. Well, guess who was the brains behind it? Pop, Smoke, and Ghost says, Pop, Smoke, and Ghost says, Lakers have too many divas. Listen, I agree with that. Listen, I want to be clear on one thing. I'm not UConn homer guy that's saying that Dan Hurley is retiring as a Husky. I think those days in this era, it's going to be hard to keep a coach for 20, 25 years. John Calipari, we thought was going to be a Wildcat as recently as like 2019, 2021. Thought there's no way he's going anywhere else. He's gone. Nick Saban retired. It's going to be hard to retain guys in this era as far as coaches are concerned. And Dan Hurley's been very vocal about how much he hates the portal and he hates everything to do with the portal. And so I just bring it up because I'm not sitting here and being naive and saying Dan Hurley is never leaving. But again, let's just talk it out. Dan Hurley, a guy who's calculated about everything. I've been told even some of those tweets that he sends out that we think are funny, he spends hours like, should I do it? Should I not do it? I'm thinking about doing it. Maybe this cross. And it's like, and he's going to really bet his, it's not his career, because he could come back to college no different than a Billy Donovan, than a whoever. He'd have no trouble. John Calipari getting Rick Pitino, getting a job again. But at this point, a chance to win a third straight national title and really put yourself in history. I know it's the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't think it's a good job. It's sort of a dysfunctional organization. The Lakers, think about since Kobe retired, and even the last couple of years with Kobe were not good, is that, and Kobe, by the way, really branches back to the Jerry Bus era. Listen, I live in LA. The Bus family is a constant source of amusement and entertainment and mockery. Actually, I don't, nobody really respects him, if I'm being perfectly honest. So Dan Hurley's going to come into that infrastructure with a 40-year-old LeBron James, 3 head coaches in the last 4 years. Vogel gets fired after winning an NBA title. Darvin Ham gets fired a year after winning the Western Conference. It doesn't make sense to me. Let's keep it going for the producer. So Jacob brings up a point, and I think I mentioned it earlier. Torres, to me, if this happens, it would be pretty screwed up for Dan Hurley not to tell Alex Karaban. Alex Karaban withdrew from the draft thinking he was the coach. Listen, I know everybody thinks that their coach is the most loyal guy and he's never going to leave your school. And, our school is different and our coach is different and whatever. I think there's something to that, Jacob. So Dan Hurley has had a 5-year relationship with Alex Karaban, recruits him, red shirts, now has won 2 national championships with him. Alex Karaban goes through the entire NBA draft process, waits until the final day in a draft where he would have been drafted, and decides, you know what? Nah, I think I'm just gonna stick around and stay in college. And now Dan Hurley bails a week later. I just don't buy it. And again, you just go to the timeline. It doesn't make sense. Just think about it. Let's just talk about it out loud. He's been the favorite of the Lakers since the beginning, but they didn't pursue him. Like, that doesn't make sense. Listen, we have a very smart audience, okay? Many of you are employers. Many of you hire people. Many of you have interns, have whoever. Do you ever have any sort of opening and wait a month to contact the candidate that you wanted all along? By the way, here's something else I hadn't considered until right now. Remember when the job opened after Frank Vogel? Or it was when Frank Vogel got hired, actually. LeBron wanted Ty Lue. And if you remember, Ty Lue shows up to the interview thinking he's getting the job, and they throw out all these caveats. Well, I think it was a 3-year deal, and he thought he was getting a 5-year deal. It's this much money. And it's like, he's like, no, this is an insult. And so it's not like the Lakers haven't had a high-profile head coach in, and they've either butchered it or confused it or whatever. Something says. So Pam, our girl Pam, says he needs to stay at UConn. Pitino left the dynasty for the Celtics, and he's regretting it the rest of his life. NBA is a different beast. Pam, I think you're onto something. And the one thing I'll say about Dan Hurley, he's smart enough. He will consult with other smart people. He'll consult probably with Billy Donovan. He'll consult probably with a Rick Pitino type. I know him and Pitino aren't BFFs, but this is not going to be, I don't believe, he's just going to, he's going to show up for an interview on Friday, and he's going to, I don't know. I think at the very least, he's going to sit on it, going to think about it, going to whatever. I don't know. Let's get to a couple more questions. 17 million bucks triples his pay. I mean, that could be a possibility because the Kentucky job is a lateral move. Okay. Pamela, H-fan, better watch Cat will leave in a heartbeat. For the producer Torres, what's your thoughts on them visiting with Andrea? You think that means they have positive momentum towards a deal being done? Saw the Andrea Hurley reports. I don't know what's true and what's not. I just know that every time there's a big job opening, there's always the wife that falls in love with the local real estate. I remember being at FS1 the year that Nick Saban was supposedly dead set on becoming the Texas head coach. And Terry Saban, Miss Terry, was already in Austin looking at real estate. And everybody knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who had a cousin that was a friend of whatever that saw Terry Saban looking at houses in Austin. And it didn't materialize to much. And so I don't know what to believe with the Andrea Hurley story anymore. I know this is what I know. And then we'll get out of here, take a couple more questions. I know that the facts of the story don't line up. I know that the facts of the story don't make sense. And when the facts of the story don't line up, when the facts of the story don't make sense, what that generally means is that either one side is using the other for something, or that both sides are using the other for something. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, right? Think about Crap. Think about, let me even give you an abstract example. Remember there was that like 24-hour period where nobody really knew who was going to be the next Arkansas head coach. And it's like, who's going to be the next head coach at Arkansas? And it was like, Will Wade's going to interview, but nobody could really confirm that Will Wade was going to interview. Darryl Walker's going to interview. And then nobody could really confirm that Darryl Walker was the interview. And all of a sudden out of nowhere, it was like, oh, Cal has the job. Oh, Cal might be talking. Oh no, Cal has the job. And so when I say that is that was a story where the facts didn't really add up. And then it made sense at the end. The reason that no one could really confirm if Will Wade was actually meeting with Arkansas or not is because he never did. Because Darryl Walker never did. Because it was all a smoke screen for them to get Cal in under the cloak of darkness. And so I think that's a little bit of it here. Again, I think they want J.J. Redick. I think J.J. Redick's been done. I think the facts from Shams and J.J. himself reflect that. But if you just hire J.J., you're going to get crushed. Well, we tried Dan Hurley. He went back and got a big extension. Dan Hurley gets his big extension, goes for title number 3. A couple more. Maurice says, you don't get on a plane just to turn something down. When you're looking for a new contract, you do. I hate to say it, Maurice. I mean, I don't know your background. I'm not here to criticize, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And if you feel like you have been disrespected by your employer, if you feel like there's something that you need that you're not getting, why not? By the way, I don't think John Calipari ever got on a plane to talk to UCLA many years ago, but that story went on for 2 or 3 days. Cal let it drag on so that he could get his lifetime contract. Just saying. This is where I'm the crazy ex-girlfriend. Where do the UConn players go if this happens? So we talked about that. Just say you don't want Hurley to leave. I don't. Would have to promote a staff member. I agree. What else? Torres, any shot Murray and Young both stay? I think there's absolutely a shot that Luke Murray and Kamani Young both stay. Now, I also think that if one gets the job, I think it's more likely that the other doesn't, because I think they both would kind of feel like I'm qualified, I'm due, it's my time, whatever. But whatever. Let me see here. Any other questions? Bruce Pearl makes me think of Cal, Billy D. Okay. Want to know what? Okay. Lakers going to make Hurley an offer he can't refuse. All right. Tell you what. I think we're going to get out of here. The chat is ablaze right now. But tell you what, I think it's time for me to get out of here. As I said, I think that's all for today's Aaron Torres pod. By the way, first of all, Bobby Hurley is not a candidate. Let's put that to rest right now. I'd rather have Bob Hurley Sr. than Bob Hurley Jr. Let's put that to rest. Let's see who else. That's basically it. All right. Tell you what, I think we're going to get out of here. Appreciate everybody tuning in, kind of a spur of the moment deal. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, I promise you, I'll be bringing my equipment to Vegas. If something happens, you will get a reaction video at some point almost immediately, okay? So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, better make sure to do so. If you're not subscribed to the pod on Apple or Spotify, make sure to do so. But it's time for me to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support. Make sure you're subscribed to the pod, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Insta, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. Shout out to, I guess we had between Twitter and YouTube during an NBA Finals game, I would guess we had well over 1,000 people live. So I appreciate everybody's support. Let's see, anything else? But I think that's it. Tell you what, thank you again for everybody tuning in. It is time for me to go. It's time for me to get out of here. If nothing crazy happens, I will be back on Monday. Something crazy happens, we will get back before then. Appreciate everybody.